We're going to work through week 4. This was also past paper questions that came to a total of 50 marks, which means it should take about an hour to complete. So the first question here we had was about Shamila, who's a teacher at a local high school, and she's going to go on retirement, and they give you some information about her retirement. And the first thing they want you to do is write out her full pension fund benefit in words. So this was quite straightforward because they give you, there's the benefit, and you can just literally write it out exactly as they say there. So it was 3 million, so we just write 3 million 457,000 920. Okay. Then we had the next question. Just move this out the way here. So the next question that we had there was asking us to determine the amount of money that she can withdraw if she chooses option number 1. So the amount of money that she can withdraw if she chooses option 1, and they tell us here under option number 1 that she can withdraw 1/3 of the full pension benefit. So that's quite straightforward. We just need to know what is 1/3 of the benefit. So all we're going to do is say, let's make it a bit larger here. What is 1/3 of, in maths is always multiplication, so 1/3 of 3,457,920. And you can pop that into a calculator. You could have also divided by 3. It's the same thing. You're going to get to 1,152,640. Okay. Then we were asked that if Shamila decides to choose option 2, she wants to loan her money to her daughter Suraya, who intends on relocating to New Zealand. So the first one is Shamila states that the amount of tax she will pay on the estimated value of her pension fund is more than $1 million. Verify showing all correct calculations whether her statement is correct. So this is working with a tax calculation. I'm just going to go onto a new page for this. Okay, so here we go with our tax bracket, and we know that the total amount of her pension is 3 million. So you can already see, looking at that she's going to fall into our last bracket, the highest bracket there. So we're just going to need to do our normal tax calculation. So when we do this, you start with the formula. I always say write it out in full first as it's written in the table. So we would have this yellow line here. And then you just rewrite it, filling in the missing values. So the 130,500 stays the same, plus stays the same. 36%, you can leave as 36%, or if you like to do it as a fraction, you can say 36 over 100. Of in maths is multiply. And then this little bracket, but the taxable income above that amount, we know we do as a subtraction. So we're going to say 3,457,920, that was her pension amount, minus the 1,050,000 over there. Right, then from here you can start going into your calculator. So we just do this step by step. 130,500 plus 36 over 100 times by, and that subtraction will give you 2,407,920. Then we do our next step. We're basically using BODMAS here. We're doing multiplying first. That's why the next step is going to be doing that multiplication. So the 130,000 stays there. 36% of that will give me 866,851, 20 because it's money, so 2 decimals, And then when you add that together, you get 997,351,20. And if you recall, her statement was originally asking us, she was saying that she would pay more than $1 million. This is less than $1 million, clearly. So we just need to add there at the bottom that therefore the statement is invalid. And it's important that whenever you see verify in a question, that's your clue to go, I must have that conclusion statement as well. Okay. Right, our next question there was the ratio of the estimated value of Shamila's full pension before tax to her daughter's loan amount is 9,8798 to 1. Determine to the nearest 1,000 rand the amount that her daughter is going to borrow. All right, so this is relatively straightforward. We are working with a ratio. So I always go with, let's start by actually writing out our ratio, 9,8798 to 1. And we label which side is which. So if this side is Shamila, because that's the first thing that they tell us, the value of the pension, to the daughter, which is there. Now we are looking for the daughter's amount. So on my next line, I'm going to say this is the one that I'm looking for, which implies I must know Shamila's amount already. And I do, because it's the amount that was her pension. And if you check the question, that would have been the 3,457,920. Now we're working with a ratio, so you have a few ways of doing this. Generally speaking, to me, the easiest is always to use our divide up, multiply across. So that means I'm going to take the 3 million, divide by what's above it, and then multiply by what's across from it. If you use that method with a ratio, it'll always work out. You can think of it other ways. You can think of it as I need to know 9,8798 times what gave me the 3 million, and to find that I would do division. But it's the same basic concept. And with that division, your result should come up to 349,998,99. And they do tell us rounded to the nearest 1,000. So if I'm rounding to the nearest 1,000, we go and look at where's our 1,000 column? This is our 1,000 column, this 9. I'm going to look next door to see does it go up or down. And because it's a 9 next door, it's going to go up. So that will make it go up to 350,000 rand. And that is my final answer. Right. Then if we look at C is asking us here that Soraya agrees to borrow the money at a simple interest rate of 7.8% per annum. She plans to pay it off with interest at the end of the 3-year period, and they want you to determine how much she will repay after 3 years. So remember, we're not going to use a formula because it is maths lit and they don't mark it if you use the formula. We need to understand conceptually that if it is simple interest, the interest amount that she's going to pay each year is going to be the same. They do tell us this interest is charged per year. So remember, this is kind of the change that comes from grade 10 and 11 to grade 12. Is sometimes it won't be per year, it'll be per 6 months, per month, per week, and that'll affect what we're doing. But in this case, it is told per year, and we are told it's going to be for 3 years. So the easiest way to do this is to say, well, how much interest is she paying for 1 year? And then multiply it going through for the 3 years. Now we are carrying forward our answer from the previous question, the 350,000, because that's how much she's borrowing. If you got the wrong answer in the previous question, but you're using the same method as what I'm showing you, you can still get all 4 marks for this question. It doesn't matter if your values are wrong, as long as your method is correct, carrying through the value from the previous question. Okay, but we know that this is the right answer from the previous question. We need to know what is going to be the interest. Well, the interest we're told is 7.8% per year. So we go 7.8%, or you could do that over 100. That will give us the interest for 1 year. And then because we're told we're paying interest 3 years, we're going to say times by the 3 years. Okay, and that gives me 81,900. That is the interest for 3 years. And we want to know how much she's going to repay altogether, the total amount that she's going to repay. Well, she's going to have to repay the 350,000 that she borrowed, and she's also going to repay the interest, 81,900, which when you add that gives us 431,900 in total. All right, there are a couple of different ways of doing this, but the important thing is do not use that simple interest formula with the P and the N and the I that other subjects do allow you to use. We need to see, what we're really testing to see if you understand in Mathlit is, do you get the idea that the interest for simple interest is the same amount every period, in this case every year. So if I know how much it is for one period, in this case 1 year, I can know what the interest is going to be for all 3 years and then combine it together. Okay, and importantly, this is simple interest. If it was compound interest, it would be a completely different method to this. Okay, so that was the end of that 5.1 from this question. We'll go on to our next question. All right, so our first question here is, identify which view of the bakkie is represented with the dimensions of 1815 millimeters by 1860 millimeters. So if I look at my diagram, we can see the 1815 is actually looking at the height, which already tells me that I'm going to be looking at the bakkie head on, in the sense of I'm not looking down from above, or I'm not looking up from below, because then I wouldn't see the height. And then they tell us the measurement of 1860. So that implies that I'm either going to be looking at the front or the back, because the back would obviously be the same measurement as the front. So when they're saying identify what view, the question really is like, where am I standing and looking at this bakkie from? And if I can see this front measurement and I can see the height, I'm either standing in front of the bakkie or behind the bakkie. So we can say here either a frontal view or front view or rear view. Either one would be fine. Basically, if we kind of look at this top image here, I would be either standing over here or I would be standing over here. All right? Anywhere else that I was standing, either looking like that way or that way. Anywhere else that I'm standing, I would be seeing this side measurement and not the top and not the front measurement. Okay. If we look at 5.1.2, it tells us to calculate the value of D. D is the space between the sides of the bakkie and the side walls of the garage. And they tell us that the bakkie is parked exactly in the middle of the garage. So this telling us that it's in the middle of the garage already implies that to find D, we're going to need to halve our measurement somewhere. Okay, so let's just look at our little measurements that we have over here. Take me away from here now. Okay, so we know the whole way across from end to end of our garage is 3,6 meters. They tell us that. We also know the width of the bakkie, because that we're told on the other image of the car, which was on the side there. And we know this is 1860 millimeters. So theoretically, if I take that 3,6 meters, I take away the bakkie, I should be left with the total amount of space. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go 3,6 minus 1,86 meters. This is me just converting into meters from millimeters. You could have done it the other way around as well. And if I subtract that, I'm going to get to 1,74 meters. And that 1,74 is really the D space plus the other D space. So then in order to find one D space, I can go 1,74 divided by 2. Sorry, this is not ideal spacing. Let me go a bit lower. 1,74 divided by 2. And that will give me the space of 1, which is 0,74. 0.87 meters. Okay, and that's the length of D. All right. I don't believe the question specified what unit to work with. So if we just go back and look, no, they didn't. So that means you can leave it in meters. Or if you had worked fully in millimeters and you said 3,600 millimeters minus 1,860, that would also be perfectly acceptable because they haven't specified which unit they want you to work in for that. Okay. Then if we look at our last question over here, we've got Letitia, who needs to choose a color for the window tint. And they tell us buckies come in 4 different colors: white, black, blue, or green. And you can use either 35% or 50% tint. State how many different choices there are for this bucky. Okay, so this is really something where you're wanting to be thinking about possibly using a tree diagram if you can't picture it already. You can also think of it as just going, well, look, we know for each of these, right? The white, well, let's actually list it over here so we can see what we're doing. So we have the white, we have the black, okay, we have the blue, and we have the green. So those are the 4 different color options. And then for each of these options, we can have either the 35 or the 50. So for purposes, I'm just going to do, okay, option 1, 35, option 2 is the 50. Same thing for this one. Black could be 35 or 50. Blue, 35 or 50. And green, 35 or 50. So realistically, we are basically saying for each color car, there's 2 options. So therefore, I have a total of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have 8 choices. So I use the word choices. Okay. There's other ways you can think about it to kind of get there, but tree diagrams are the method we're kind of most familiar with, which is why I'm explaining it using a tree diagram. The important thing here is you're not actually being tested on method, although this would be a nice question to ask you to draw a tree diagram for, but you're not being tested on method in this. As long as you say 8, however you made sense of that in your head, will be fine. All right, and that was that question. We're now going to go on to 5.2. Okay, so 5.2 had to do with the strip chart for springbuck with windhoek in Namibia. And the first question we're asked is just a straightforward knowledge question, saying what is the difference, or state one difference between a strip chart and a normal road map. So there's a few things you could have said here. One of them would have been to say the fact that strip charts are not actually drawn to a scale, whereas a normal road map is. So if you think of the strip chart, I'll just put it in front of us here. This is not a scale map. And really this is a case of, if you look at this, for example, a very easy one to see why we're saying it's not drawn to scale is from here, Windhoek, going this way. It's 203 kilometers. If I go the other direction though, a different color, and I go in this direction, that's pretty much the same distance on the map. Like if you measure it, it'll be pretty close to the same length, but that's 330 kilometers. So you can see it's not actually in any form of a scale. Likewise, if we go down, I'll just use a different color for going down. If I go down from here to here, from Windhoek down to this place, you can see it's going down 82 kilometers, right? That's the distance carrying forward. But if I travel the next set of distance and I go from here to here, right, the distance between these two places is going to be 240 minus 82. So 248 minus 82, which is like 160 odd, 166 if I'm going to be specific, kilometers. Even though on the map those distances do not look like they're that great. We've got an 82 versus 166, so it's almost double the distance, but you can see the actual map spacing is different. So strip charts are not drawn to scale in the same way that a road map would be. Strip charts are also not always orientated north. Now in this case it is because they've given us that. But a lot of the time a strip chart is not actually orientated north because it's showing a specific route. It could be the route is actually like heading in a southeast direction or northwest or something like that. So that is not always something that is on a strip chart, whereas road maps are typically orientated north at the top of the map. Okay, so that would give you the sort of differences between them. If we go back to look at the next question, they say determine the distance between Springbok and Go Babus. I don't know how you say the name, unfortunately. So we're going to go and look at the map and see where those places are. Let's just actually remove all of the writing. Okay, and if I look, we can see Springbok is down here at the bottom. And the place we're looking for is actually up here. So that tells me two things. First, I'm going to need to know the distance from Springbok all the way up to Windhoek. And that's quite easy to do because they give us those distances on the side of the map. So I'm starting at Springbok at North. I'm going to go all the way up. And I've traveled 892 kilometers to get to Windhoek. This is important. This is only getting me to Windhoek. So that will give me 892. I then also need to add the extra 203 that takes me off that main route to go to where we're wanting to be, which is another 203 kilometers. So my total distance is actually going to be 1,095 kilometers between those two cities. Okay. Okay, the next question, 5.2.3, which I don't have on the screen, but it asks us to identify the Namibian town between South Africa and Namibia. So we need to see where is South Africa and Namibia. And here is our border crossing. They tell us over here, this is our border crossing over there. And they wanted the Namibian town. So that tells me they're wanting it on the Namibia side of the border, which would be this Noord over there. And you can just state the town for that. All right. Our next question here is 5.2.4, which tells us about the trip that she's taken. We are told she leaves Solitaire at 4 o'clock and travels 140 kilometers south on the C14. She then turns right and travels 289 kilometers east on the C19. And at Mariental, she turned and drove to Keetmanshoop and arrived at 12:25. So the first thing that they want us to do is calculate the total distance that she traveled. So if we look at this, we already know two of the distances because they tell us that in the question itself, right? We're told she travels 140 kilometers the one way, and then she travels another 289. What we don't know is this from Mariental to Keetmanshoop. So we need to go and look at our map to see where that is and what the distance is between them. And if I look, I can see here's Keetmanshoop here, and here's the Mariental over here. So really this is just the distance that we need, is that short distance over there. This is a strip chart, so it's quite straightforward. We're going to see firstly which direction are we traveling in. Well, we're traveling from Mariental down to Keetmanshoop, which tells me I'm going to go on this side, right? Because this side is, if you look at the numbers, it's going up in that direction. And then all we're going to do is find out the difference between the two distances given. So we're just going to say 465 minus the 248. Alright, and then if you subtract those two, you can get 217. So we have 217 kilometers for that last distance that we didn't know. And then they want the total distance altogether, so we just go back to add all of those together. So we're going to say here for her distance, it was 140 from the question, 289 from the question, and 217 from the map. And when you add all of that together, you get 646 kilometers. Okay. Now this next question is quite a big question because you can already see it's 11 marks. And we've got here, Letitia traveled on different types of roads and she maintained an average speed limit prescribed for these types of roads. She stopped 3 times during her trip to take a break. So I'm already highlighting that because it's going to come up. She stated that each of her breaks were 25 minutes. And they want to verify with calculation whether her statement is correct. And if we look, the statement that we actually need to verify is about the time of her breaks. Were her 3 breaks approximately 25 minutes each? Alright, so my thinking here is, well, we need to know about how much time her actual trip took. We need to know how much her driving time was. And then we can see if what the leftover time for the breaks works out or not. So let's first see how long did it actually take her this whole trip. Well, we're told she left at 4 o'clock in the morning and she arrived at 12:25 later in the afternoon. So the first thing I'm going to do is just double check how long is that trip that she took. And we just do that with a straightforward subtraction. So I'm just going to make a note here. Total time would have been going 12:25. That's up a bit. Minus 4 o'clock. And if you subtract that, you're going to get 8 minutes and 8 hours and 25 minutes. You can do this with a column sum. 5 minus nothing is 5. I'm just a bit short on space over here. 2 minus nothing is 2. And 12 minus 4 is 8. So I'll just write it over here for the sake of space. 8 hours and 25 minutes. Okay. Now the question is, how much of that time was driving time? So let's go and see what we know about driving and her speeds. Because they do talk about she's driving at the right speed limits. So somewhere we need to know something about speed limits. So if I go and look at the map, let me just get rid of all of this from the last question. Here at the bottom we can see where we know something about the speed limits, right? We are told that on national or highway roads she can travel at 120 and on gravel roads she can travel at 80 kilometers an hour. So let's just double check her route on the map and how much of it was going at each speed. So we are told that she starts at Solitaire. So if I look at the map, there's Solitaire. And she traveled 140 kilometers south on the C14. So C14, I can see it over here, which already kind of implies to me that this is going to be a gravel road, the C14. Okay, you don't have to follow her route perfectly. We just need to know the type of road for each one. So if I just make a little note on the end here for now, I'm just going to make a note that we know the C14, she was traveling at, was a gravel road, so that was 80 kilometers per hour. And they do tell us she traveled 140 kilometers. So I'm going to make a note of that. 140 kilometers. Okay. The next part we have is she traveled on the C19 for 289 kilometers. So I'm going to go and look on my map and see where is C19. And it's just a different color. C19 I can see is over here. And that's also a gravel road. Right? And I'm just finding that out by comparing the type of the road that we're looking at here. They also tell us the C roads or gravel roads as well. So we know that she traveled on the C19. Again, average speed would have been 80 kilometers per hour. And this time it was for longer. It was for 289 kilometers. I'm getting that from the question. Huh? Then the last part of her journey, we know she was traveling on that little middle route, and we did look at this a bit earlier. Just a different color. She went from here all the way down to there. We know that from the last question it was 217 kilometers, and you can see this is now on a national road. It's a B road. So if I go and look down here at our B roads, it was 120 kilometers an hour. So this was on the B1 road. That's 120 kilometers an hour. And she traveled on that for 217 kilometers. We got that from the last question, right? So let's work out how much time that trip actually took her. So this is just doing speed, distance, time. I'm going speed times by distance. Should give me my time. Sorry, not speed times by distance. Distance divided by speed. Which I'm just going to rewrite quickly to show the right calculation. Okay. And if I do this division, I'm going to get 1,75 hours on the C14. Remember, I know my time is going to be in hours because this is kilometers per hour. The second one is going to give me 3,6125 hours. And the third one is going to give me 1,8083, and then it kind of keeps going quite a bit longer, but I'm just going to do that, hours. So those are my three different times for the different roads that she was on. I can now go and see, okay, well, what was the total time altogether? And if I add all my times together, I'm going to get to 7,17. So if I add all that together, I get to 7,1708, and then the 3's kind of keep going along. Okay, so that now gives me my drive time. So realistically, I'm just going to go on to having a bit more space. All right. So realistically, we knew we needed a total of 8 hours, 25 minutes, right? Because that was her drive time. If we take away the time she was actually driving, what we should be left with is her stops. And then the question is, were those stops 25 minutes each? So I need to subtract the 7,17. But 7,17 is a bit of a problem because it's in hours with a decimal. And this 8 hours and 25 is hours and minutes. So I'm going to just convert this. And the way that I'm converting this is I'm going to have 7 hours and 10 minutes. It works out to 10 minutes if you calculate it. If you don't know where the 10 minutes are coming from, I did that by basically saying 0, let's not use that color. 0,170833. Right, the decimal portion, and I multiplied it by 60 to turn it into minutes. And when you multiply that by 60, you get to 10 minutes. Okay, so that's where that 10 is coming from over there. Okay, the important thing here with time is do not just change the decimal into minutes. So meaning this is not 17 minutes. It's only actually 10 minutes. Okay, so if I subtract those two times, I get left with 1 hour, 15 minutes, right? Now, the question is, 1 hour and 50 minutes, is that going to be 3 stops at 25 minutes each? So we have two options. One is I could just say, well, let me divide this by 3, but that gets a little complicated because I've got minutes and hours, and realistically I'm going to have to convert this fully into minutes first. So I could do that. I could say, well, this is going to be 60 plus 15, which is actually 75 minutes. And then if I say 75 divided by 3, 25 minutes per stop. Okay. The other way you could have done it is you could have said, well, 25 times 3 is 75 minutes. which is 1 hour 15. And then you could have drawn that comparison of that value to that answer over there. Okay, so either multiplying your way up and comparing it, or dividing down. Either one would have worked for that. Then our final part of our question here, because they did tell us verify, is was she right in saying it would have been 25 minutes per stop? And we can say yes, it actually works out quite nicely. She would be correct, so therefore we just say she was correct as our final mark. Okay, that was one method of how to work this out. There is a few alternatives to it, so I would suggest if you had a different method, or if you want to check out a different method to this, it's worth checking the memo for the alternatives, because there are a few different ways you could do this. But at the end of the day, the main thing here was you needed to, in some way, shape, or form, work out how much was the driving time compared to how much was the total time, and then was the difference between them equal to the 75 minutes, the 3 25-minute stops. That was the gist of what you're trying to do with this. Okay. Right, our very last question over here is asking us here, calculate the difference between the maximum and minimum values for store B. So this was quite straightforward, because all you had to do is read your values off your table and know what maximum and minimum is when we're looking at a box and whisker. So when we're looking at box and whisker, we always start with our minimum value at this side here. And I'm just going to, for the sake of doing this, label this quickly. So we always start with our minimum value. This would have been Q1 if we had a Q1. We don't need to worry about it, but just for revision purposes. This line over here would have been our Q2, or our median. Our next line over there would have been Q3, or upper quartile. And then our last one, which is actually what we're concerned with, this line over here, that would be our maximum value. And we can just read the values from underneath it. And this one's quite nice. You don't even have to estimate. We have here 140 and 440. Difference between them, 440 minus 140, 300. And that was basically your answer for that one. So nice straightforward question to end off on that. Alright, that would be the end of week 4. I hope you found this helpful. Check in with your teachers if you're not sure on anything we've covered in this activity.